Hello and welcome to this presentation entitled Toward an Ecological Model for Student Civic Development by myself, Jackson Harris, and Dr. Lane McClellan of Crossroads Civic Engagement Center at the University of Alabama. This presentation was originally prepared and presented for the annual meeting of the Engagement Scholarship Consortium hosted in fall 2022 by the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. In this presentation, we will review the civic mission of higher education. We'll briefly tell the story of our organizational shift at UA Crossroads away from what we describe as the programmatic paradigm and toward an ecological paradigm. And we'll briefly share how this paradigm has helped us reimagine the role of our center, our staff, and the work we do. Now, here's a driving and we believe critical question for not only us at Crossroads Civic Engagement Center, but also all colleges and universities in our country. The question is this: are our students more willing and able for engagement in their communities and democracies on graduation day than they were at orientation? Now, this is the sort of question that keeps folks like us up at night, but also excited to come to work every day to figure out how we can contribute to that sort of civic development. Over 10 years ago now, the National Task Force for Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement published a landmark report entitled A Crucible Moment: College Learning and Democracy's Future. On page 2 of that report, the authors wrote, "As a democracy, the United States depends on a knowledgeable, public-spirited, and engaged population. Education plays a fundamental role in building civic vitality, and in the 21st century, higher education has a distinctive role to play in the renewal of U.S. democracy." Now, when we think of civic learning or civic education, our immediate thoughts may go to the area of civic knowledge, learning about the Constitution or the Supreme Court or the history of U.S. presidents. But we know that especially within higher education, civic learning takes on a more expansive definition, including, of course, civic knowledge, but also civic skills, the development of civic values, and civic action. This is from page 4 of A Crucible Moment, and we use this same model. We refer to them as 4 civic pillars to think through what all we mean when we say civic learning and democratic engagement, especially at the University of Alabama. As an expression of how important this idea of development is, let's take a quick look at our own mission and vision statements for UA Crossroads. You'll notice that in both statements we mentioned developing engaged citizen and developing civic capacity. That extends beyond the dissemination of civic knowledge and encourages something different, encourages a change in not just our students, but in everyone who participates reciprocally in this idea of civic learning and engagement. So how do we think all that development happens exactly? That's one of the major questions that we hope this presentation will prompt us to think about. What do we think contributes to student change from the first day of college to graduation day? Put another way, what is our implicit theory of student development? We all have theories of change, whether we call them that or not. Otherwise, why would we buy into this idea of education at all? We expect that something happens from day one to graduation day. And it's important to ask that question. Why? Well, it's important to ask that question because how we envision student development shapes how we support and intervene in that development. Our theory informs our practice. And so that is why we at UA Crossroads have spent a lot of time thinking through how we think student change and development occurs and what our role is in impacting and shaping that development. For many of us, our implicit theory of student development and change may resemble a racetrack. I've chosen Mario Kart here as an example. You can tell even by some of the ways we talk about student retention and success. We should concentrate on making sure students stay on track. We try to ensure that they cross the finish line. And even some of our major national programs and initiatives are called things like Race to the Top. So this race car imagery seems to resonate with how we think an educational experience might play out. As with Mario Kart, there may even be things along the track, boosts or level ups or special things that we can sprinkle through. Maybe that's study abroad or an experience within Student Government Association that may be in addition to a core curricular experience, but that can enhance a student's journey, but still from point A to point B. This is a linear model, and it's what we are referring to as a programmatic paradigm. The little programs might get spread across this overall journey, but again, the idea is that students start in one place and they end in another. Let's take a closer look at that. At the higher level of an institution as a whole, we might think about students coming in at orientation or their first year experience, moving through what we call a college experience, and then all graduating, getting the same diploma that says they have had this college experience, they are now educated at this level. And we also apply what we are calling a programmatic paradigm to smaller programs, be they extracurricular or intercurricular type of activities. We may say that a student goes into their experience within let's say a living learning community with certain approaches, thoughts, ideas, concepts, understandings, and after they have emerged through that living learning community, they now are a different student with different, hopefully improved concepts and understandings. This is basically the idea of a programmatic paradigm. There are inputs, there is some sort of black box experience in which something happens to these students, and then there are outputs, a different type of student or a developed student. Here's an example of that. The programmatic paradigm fits really well with this example from alternative break. This is when a student might go on a service trip of some sort or a leadership experience during their spring, fall, winter break. And you'll notice that our friends at Alternative Break use a continuum in which a student might move from member, someone who's not concerned with their role in social problems, through the experience and towards something more like an active citizen, someone for whom community becomes a priority in values and life choices. Again, it's very linear, and we can kind of tell by asking the right questions how much this Alternative Break experience moved them from one point on the continuum to another. Now, this programmatic paradigm has a heuristic quality, and it can prompt us to ask questions like, what kind of outputs and outcomes do we want from this program, from this experience? How can we build a better program to guide students through? What successes can we claim from putting this program in place? How many students can we get to go through the program in a year? And of course, how can we scale the program to increase our outputs? These are great questions to ask, and these are the questions, or an idea of the questions, that a programmatic paradigm will prompt us to ask. Here's the however, here's the caveat. Even back in 2012, the Crucible Moment report noted that our civic learning programs in colleges and universities across America were not deliberately orchestrated in a developmental arc. They were not pervasive across student experiences and were not expected of every graduate. Even after 10 years since a Crucible Moment, our field of civic learning and democratic engagement within higher ed is still struggling to move from the partial foundation laid in this area to making sure that civic learning is a pervasive factor of our colleges and universities. What we're still shooting for is to make civic learning and the development of civic capacity and skills an integral part of this educational developmental arc. In 2018, scholars and practitioners with the American Democracy Project and NASPA published a newer report that points out that our best civic learning and democratic engagement efforts within higher ed were going to need to be integral, relational, organic, and generative. And that doesn't quite sound like the programmatic paradigm that we have been operating on. It sounds like something new and something different. Today, we have arrived at a more ecological paradigm for student development, and indeed civic development within student educational experiences and journeys. It's not necessarily an inputs-outputs type of situation. It's something more vibrant, something thriving, something organic and generative. Now, ecological thinking is not new to the field of higher education. In fact, our own views on student civic development within an ecology comes from the campus ecology theory as well as student developmental ecology. Basically, what we're saying is that campus environments can be shaped to promote optimal growth and development. And this paradigm not only focuses on the individual student, but also his or her surrounding people, places, and policies. Once we recognize the possibilities for change within the student environment, we're faced with a choice. Are we going to participate in creating the sort of campus environment or ecology that discourages, confuses, and alienates students? Or are we going to make intentional efforts to put together a campus ecology, a developmental ecology, which is orderly, predictable, coherent, and encouraging for the sort of student civic development we're after? So how does this ecological thinking begin to shape how we view our work at Crossroads Civic Engagement Center and at the University of Alabama? Well, as opposed to the race car track or the Mario Kart map, we've begun thinking about student development in the area of civic capacity, learning, skills, etc., as more of a Plinko board. That game from The Price is Right, where there are several spots, if not infinite spots, for a starting place, and also several ending spots. Yes, there is still a journey taking place, but there's a lot of bouncing around that can happen. There's a good deal of luck, and also creates for us this perfect metaphor of interventions in which we can play a role in the direction that that student travels throughout their educational journey. What we have found is that it's not enough to simply ask about student development and whether or not students are developing during their time in college. A better question is, in what ways are students developing? Because we recognize the truth that students can become engaged citizens, but in a way that's not necessarily positive engagement, in a way that might be antisocial, anti-democratic, or anti-community, which obviously we don't want. We can think then about the ending places or the landing places on this Plinko board of the college experience being a spectrum between pro-community and democracy and society on one side and all the other things on the other. Our hope is to create the sort of interventions throughout the college experience that makes those students move towards the pro-social, pro-community side of the board and not end up in the isolated, anti-democratic side of the board. This image of the Plinko board journey fits quite well with some of the literature around student developmental ecology. Note how this particular research cited here mentions the importance of tailoring interventions to the context for the student. That's taking different approaches and creating different interventions for each individual student. That obviously is going to be shaped by at what point they enter into the college journey and what sort of backgrounds they bring with them, preconceived notions and life experiences and so on. And also underscores the importance of intervening simultaneously at multiple levels. Students can and should be learning positive lessons about community and engagement in their roommate situation, in their curricular situation, in their extracurricular experiences, and so on. We're learning every step of the journey, and that forces us to ask the question, what are we learning and teaching in those student spaces? As an example for a best case scenario, imagine that a student comes into their college experience generally isolated from community and perhaps even harboring anti-democratic and antisocial attitudes or conceptualizations of the world. Our hope is that at various levels they might interact with these sorts of community and civic-minded interventions, such as general education requirements, which are built and designed to expand their worldview or bring them in contact with opinions and life experiences they may not have otherwise been in contact with. Perhaps at some point in their matriculation, they might even pick up a summer internship in Washington, D.C., or perhaps our state capital of Montgomery. By the end of their experience, they may be tasked with some sort of civic or community-oriented capstone project. These, of course, are high-impact practices, as we know, and can hopefully serve to move that student from wherever their starting place was, even in this case where it's far over to one side, towards a more pro-community, pro-social mindset at graduation. This is the ideal. When we begin to see our work and the college experience through these more ecological terms, we begin to ask different questions. And some of those questions might be, how does this effort complement and enhance related efforts? How can we equip and encourage students to direct their own development as they journey through their unique college experience? How are we emphasizing transferability of skills and ideas across different contexts? And finally, how are we accounting for or leveraging non-campus contributors or constraints on development? For instance, all those things going on in a student's life besides what's happening on campus, or perhaps even what that student is listening to in their earbuds as they cross the quad. This ecological way of thinking about our work here at the University of Alabama has had a profound impact on how we go about that work. The theory has informed and continues to inform our practice. For instance, we're encouraged to seek collaborations and connections rather than to worry about things like credit and territory. And we've also been leaning into holistic thinking of our contributions to the campus and developmental ecology for our students, rather than worrying too much about what you might call signature programs in isolation. Now, does this mean that we've gotten completely out of the business of programs and initiatives? Absolutely not. It just means that we're putting those programs within a broader context. Here's an example. Last year, our office made what we feel like are a number of contributions to the overall campus developmental ecology that's encouraging student civic engagement and skill development, learning, etc. However, if we were to limit that list to only the things that could easily be described as signature programs, for instance, we might miss out on some of the contributions that we feel like we're making. Important contributions like the common university voting website that we rolled out last year with the help of some of our colleagues in the Division of Community Affairs. A more ecological approach to seeing our work allows us to see connections and opportunities to collaborate and increase impact across the campus developmental ecology. At this point, you may be wondering if we're dismissing the entire idea of signature programs, and our answer is no, not any more than Walt Disney World is dismissing the idea of Space Mountain. The theme park map provides for us an opportunity to see how those signature programs, or what we might refer to as e-ticket attractions, can fit within the broader context of an experience. Just like the difference between an amusement park and a theme park is the theming around all of the attractions, we can see how the signature programs that a student, a community member might engage with at a university fit within a broader developmental context. It's part of the journey, the experience, and the learning that can happen along the way. If you took all of the major attractions out of Disney World and put them in a parking lot, the experience is going to be very different, and that underscores the importance of all the connective tissue that goes on around and between some of these signature attractions, programs, etc. Another benefit of this way of thinking about our work and our contributions to a student's civic learning and development is that it underscores just how many people within a campus ecology contribute to that journey. For instance, at Walt Disney World, going with the theme park theme, there are actually underground tunnels and rooms known as the utilidor system, in which what are known as backstage cast members move from place to place in order to support what's going on at the surface level and above. And in a similar way, it reminds us of just how important folks like finance and janitorial staff, marketing, communication staff, librarians, and a host of other folks that take part in this campus ecology contribute to the student experience and the learning journey. This is something we should never forget, and this more ecological way of thinking about our work allows us to remember that on a more regular basis, and perhaps even look for increased opportunities for involvement and collaboration. Over the course of this presentation, I hope that we've provided a report on a theoretical model that's working for us and our center. We'd also like to suggest that as a field, we continue to explore models, frameworks, and approaches for student civic development. We'd also like to encourage our colleagues at the conference this presentation was originally prepared for, as well as anyone who might watch this video recording, that it's important not to lose hope when we cannot see or track the immediate outputs of our work, especially in student development. It is a collaborative and ecological effort. Thanks for what you do to to contribute to that. Our team at Crossroads Civic Engagement Center would love to hear from you. You can find more information at www.crossroads.ua.edu. Thanks for watching.